spent a lot of time on this session. Thanks. We had, other than the walkthrough yesterday, earlier in the session, we had Michael Grady give us a slideshow that you may have seen in Senate Ag too. And I think we understand that, the EPA has essentially told the state that we needed to make some changes, that this bill makes those changes, or we believe it makes those changes. And there may be other things in the bill too. It spent time, it started out as a bill out of the Ag Committee. It spent some time in Natural Resources, I think, another committee, one of the money committees. Anyway, I'll let you take it from there, Senator Collimore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Senator Collimore from the Rutland District. And I'm just going to use part of my floor notes, if I could, to kind of set things up. And then Senator Hardy will be joining us with what was an amendment to this bill, a strike all, as I remember. And she'll walk through maybe it wasn't a strike all, but she'll walk through the changes. So many of you are probably aware, in March of 2022, the Conservation Law Foundation, along with Vermont Natural Resources Council and the Lake Champlain Committee, jointly filed a petition with the Environmental Protection Agency alleging that Vermont was not meeting the requirements of the Clean Water Act, and was requesting that the EPA either force the state to make corrections, or indeed, as the chair referenced, they would step in themselves and regulate clean water enforcement. Right now, that's controlled by two different agencies, the Agency of Agriculture and the Agency of Natural Resources. So that was in 22. 2 years later, in September of 2024, the EPA issued a statement and a letter quoting that Vermont was indeed not accurately or adequately regulating farm pollution under the Clean Water Act, and directed the state to develop a plan to establish a regulatory system run exclusively, and this is the change, by the state's Agency of Natural Resources. So it changes the oversight and authority from, I don't want to say it was ever 50-50 with Ag and A&R, but it was a joint kind of a shared responsibility. It's now going to go to the A&R. And the changes called for by the EPA will need to be implemented with adequate time for farmers to adjust, as you might imagine. So the bill S-124 was drafted by Legislative Council to respond to that initiative from the EPA. And the Senate Ag Committee began work on the bill with the intent of developing something that had the lightest touch, and I want to emphasize that, the lightest touch for farmers, but also still met the guidelines of the EPA. And the bill, as referenced earlier, made a couple of stops along the way. It went back to the Senate Natural Resources Committee for their further work on the bill, and then eventually to Senate Finance, which was unanimous and we had no problems. So I want to make that point because it became very clear to us, if we didn't do anything, we could face a de-delegation situation. What that means is, if you're delegated to authority under the Clean Water Act, each state can decide for itself how they're going to meet TMDLs and whatever else is involved. If you get de-delegated, guess who's driving the bus? The EPA is driving the bus now, and you have no authority to do anything more than follow their directive. So this bill, in many ways, mirrors what the EPA was hoping to accomplish. And as you're also probably very clear, the Agency of Agriculture each year has what is called the miscellaneous bill, and this was the beginnings of that. It usually has multiple subjects included in it. This year, the Agency of Ag requested changes to focus on just that one subject matter, and that was agricultural water quality. So at the request of both ANR and AAFM, S-24 amends agricultural water quality statutes to address those concerns raised by the EPA. It clarifies and amplifies ANR's authority as the lead Clean Water Act permitting authority in Vermont for discharges from CAFOs. I assume you all at least have a somewhat good understanding of CAFO, the concentrated animal feeding operation. And so I can walk through my floor report happened to go for about 40 minutes if I read everything here. So rather than do that, I'm just going to sort of hit the highlights. And I see Senator Hardy has joined us with the amendment. So Section 1 strikes the requirement. There was a memorandum of understanding between ag and A&R at one point. That's no longer in its place, gone. In its place, Section 1 directs A&R in consultation with the EPA and the Agency of Ag to issue a document that sets forth A&R's roles and responsibilities in implementing the Clean Water Act. And there are various requirements. There are vegetated buffer requirements, permit requirements for both large and medium-sized farms, so LFOs and MFOs, and also small farms as well. And it clarifies that A&R shall verify whether an MFO can establish that there are no unpermitted discharges on the farm. As you probably are well aware from this committee's work, large farms are under annual inspections by the Agency of Agriculture and now A&R. Medium farms also come into compliance on a regulatory basis every so often. Small farms are a little less regulatorily regulated. That kind of using an adverb and a verb with the same thing. It also strikes reference to that MOU. Sections 7 through 12 just basically amend A&R's authorities over the CAFO discharges. And again, I don't want to go through every last thing. If people have specific questions, I'll be glad to answer them. The amendment that you'll hear from Senator Hardy adds a definition of waters of the United States as opposed to waters of the state. And they are different in their definitions. When it left Senate Ag, it was waters of the United States. The amendment from Senate Natural changed that to waters of the state, which is a little bit more restricted. And again, sets forth powers and secretaries of the A&R to regulate discharges from CAFOs. I'm just trying to get the highlights here. There's a stakeholder group that will be convened to engage people as part of a pre-rulemaking process to gather input from proposed CAFO rules. Hopefully, it's going to be a well-balanced stakeholder group that takes into account both the farmers and the EPA's concerns. Section 10 is important. It amends existing A&R discharge permit authority to clarify that compliance with the RAPs alone is not sufficient to exempt the farm from the discharge permit. So they have to come into compliance with the RAPs, and now they're going to have to get a CAFO permit, and they're two separate things. And just because you're following the RAPs on one hand does not relieve you of you have to go through the CAFO piece as well. It amends A&R section related to discharge permits to clarify that a person must apply for a CAFO permit when necessary for discharge from CAFOs. They have until July 1st, 2026 to issue the first CAFO permit application. And again, on the last section 12, provides that compliance with the RAPs does not automatically qualify a farm for an exemption from stormwater permitting. The farm must also be in compliance with federal Clean Water Act, i.e. no discharges as or permitted as a CAFO. And the bill takes effect July 1st, 2025. And we heard from the normal cast of characters, if you will, water protection advocate, general counsel from the Agency of Agriculture, also the quality division director of the same agency, general counsel from A&R, the attorney from A&R, the secretary from A&R, Deaf Chiefity Counsel, Deaf Chief Counsel, the Office of Legislative Counsel, and also the rep from rural Vermont. So it went out of our committee 5-0 and made its way across the hall and down the hall a little bit to the Agency of Natural Resources. And again, they did great work. This was a great example, by the way, of two committees working hand in hand to come up with a solution that otherwise might have escaped either of them. So I want to compliment again the agency or the Committee of Natural Resources for coming up with this. And it came back to the floor, and it was a unanimous vote on the floor to accept the amendment from A&R. As I mentioned earlier, it went to Senate Finance, but it was just sort of for a cup of coffee and out the door again. And they didn't really change anything.
Good. Senator Cullimore, thank you. We got a couple of questions before we have
Sure.
her to come up. Representative O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. Brian, are CAFOs really just about water regulation, or by turning towards, CAFO permitting, then will A&R be involved in, say, like how farmers deal with soil or air or pesticides or nutrient management plans.
The answer, John, is if it affects the TMDL of Lake Champlain or in any way permits even a non-point source to discharge into the lake, they will have control over it. So it isn't just the CAFO. They're still going to be involved in other discharges besides stormwater, wastewater, whatever. Yeah.
Representative Nelson.
Yeah, this is a great. I understand A&R and BAFM coming together and working together to find a solution that satisfied the EPA. And we appropriated a fair amount of money. So their computers now will link up so they can share the data that comes from our nutrient management plans.
Mhm.
And goes. So this was not only having the two committees working together, but having the two agencies coming together to work together.
Yeah. And again, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. At some point, those two agencies did not always agree 100% of the time on ways forward for that, much like the two committees referenced here, didn't always see eye to eye on every last provision of a bill. But in this case, I think Representative Nelson's correct. AAFM and the Agency of Natural Resources are going to have to get together or risk that de-delegation issue, which I don't think any of us want to see. And the agency or the committees on natural resources and ag also got together. So it was, we had sort of a kumbaya moment on the floor where everybody was kind of congratulating themselves on everything and patting each other on the back. So it went out unanimously. And, it's pretty simple. If we don't do anything, we have a new boss. And I don't know how else to put it. So.
Any other questions for Senator Calvert? I apologize. Maybe you don't know all of us
Oh,
because,
gosh, I think I do.
yeah, okay, all
I've
right.
been hanging around for a little bit. So, yeah.
Anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's great.
We'll let you get back downstairs.
So I'm probably going to hang in.
Okay, good.
That's fair, Hardy.
Senator Hardy, good morning.
Good morning.
And let me ask, do you know all of us?
I think I could use an introduction.
Okay, right. Some of us are newer than others. Representative Nelson, you want to start?
Yeah, Representative Nelson from Kirby.
Hi, nice to meet you
Nice to meet
officially.
you. Jed Lipsky with Moyle One, so.
I'm Liam Morgan. I represent Grand Isle County and western portion of the town of Milton.
Okay,
David Durfee from
I
Shaftesbury,
know you do.
and Sunderland and Glastonbury.
Hi, Ray.
Hi.
I'm Regional Health and John O'Brien.
Michelle Baslin, Wyndham 3, Westminster, Rockingham, and Brookline in northern Wyndham County.
Representative Supranat is joining us on Zoom.
Oh, is that where she usually sits?
She's the vice chair. And then Representative Burton was running late and may join us before the meeting's
Okay.
over. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Sidonia is our committee assistant.
Well, it's nice to meet all of you, or see all of you for today, this morning. I'm Senator Ruth Hardy. I represent the Addison District. And as Senator Collmore noted, our committees worked pretty closely on this. It actually started with a bill that I introduced, S-100, which I introduced at the request of the agency and worked very closely with the Agency of Natural Resources and later the Agency of Ag to develop that bill, and was introduced as bipartisan bill to start with. And then the Agriculture Committee sort of took it up as part of their miscellaneous ag bill. And so took S-100 and put it into S-124 and then added and made modifications, but added sections related to the Agency of Agriculture and the changes in their statutes that would be necessary to sort of comply with the EPA order. And so throughout that process, the Agency of Natural Resources was in conversations with the EPA about what their plans were. And I don't know how much Senator Collmore told you a little bit about that sort of back and forth with the EPA and the litigation. But they submitted to the EPA S-100 as hey, this is the bill that we're working on. Would this meet the requirements that you're looking for? And they got back from EPA some feedback about the bill. And it was kind of interesting that the secretary came in to testify and she said, hot off the press, I have a letter from EPA. And it literally, she had received it 15 minutes before she sat down in the chair. So it was literally still warm from her printing it for us. So the EPA had given them some feedback about changes that they wanted in S124 based on their review of S100, which was very similar to 124. So part of the amendment from the Natural Resources Committee was making some of the modifications in the bill that the EPA was essentially requiring and saying, we want it to be more aligned with the Federal Clean Water Act. So there were clarifying changes, sort of technical changes that the EPA requested. And we made those obviously because we wanted to make sure that it would, be okay with them. And then we, as Senator Collmore mentioned, we changed the definition of water, which seems kind of strange. You'd think water is water, right? H2O, whatever, but statutorily, there are different definitions. The definition of waters of the US is actually narrower than the definition of waters of the state. So waters of the state include any waters that are sort of connected to other waters in the state. And that's the definitions that is used for the RAPs. So that's the definition that farmers are used to using in the regulations that the state has on farming operations, nutrient management plans, and the work that they do to meet the RAPs.
So we heard a little bit about this from Michael Grady yesterday when he walked through. So waters of the state include waters of the US
Correct.
plus more.
Right. And as Michael probably has told you, the definition of waters of the US has changed 4 times in the last 5 years. And there are also pending changes right now. So it's also an unstable definition of water. So we felt like moving to waters of the state would provide clarity for farmers and for the agencies that have to regulate, and also just kind of get us a little bit more removed from the potential chaos at the federal level.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? So if the definition is in flux or changes of the US definition, will waters of the state also be affected by that? Or would it sort of pick up any slack?
It covers, in fact, the definition of waters of the state, we amended to include waters of the US. So as that definition changes, it will be encompassed in our definition of waters of the state.
So I'm imagining a situation where the definition of waters of the US becomes narrower. So it's something that was involved is no longer included.
Yep.
Will waters of the state pick up that particular water that's no longer considered waters?
Yes, it will. The waters of the state definition is broader.
And can be expansive.
Yes, and Michael O'Grady would be a better person to get the details from. But one of the reasons was for that very purpose. We were worried that the waters of the US definition would get super narrow or go away completely or just be confusing because of all the changes at the federal level. So waters of the state is consistent. It's what farmers already have to follow for the RAPs and everything else. So.
Thank you, Representative O'Brien.
Just to follow up on your question, Chair.
Yeah.
Are waters of the US, that language embedded in the CAFO language?
Yes, in fact, I can find it in the bill for you. The definition of waters. Actually, I'm going to ask. Okay, I was about to say, I'm going to ask Senator Collmore to find it for me while I keep going. So section 8, yes, definition starting on the bottom of page 19. Waters. Waters, it's the bottom of page 24 of the bill. Oh, so waters of the United States shall have the same meaning as defined in the Federal Clean Water Act. So that's will change as the federal definition changes. And then where is waters of the state? Is that on page 8? Or beginning of the? I'll have to keep looking for that.
Bottom of page 18.
Bottom of page 18. Oh, no, middle of page 19. Maybe we have a different version, but waters or waters of the state includes all rivers, streams, creeks, brooks, reservoirs, ponds, lakes, springs, and all artificial or natural bodies or surface waters and waters of the United States, as the term is defined in the Federal Clean Act. So waters of the United States is encompassed within the definition of waters of the state, which seems counterintuitive, but that's the way we sort of threaded that needle of trying to make sure that the definition of water would stay consistent for regulators and farmers both. All right, so that was a big conversation. And then there's a stakeholder group in the bill. I don't know if Senator Collmore did go through this. And so we made some tweaks to the stakeholder group to add water quality advocates to the stakeholder group and to align the language a little bit more with the Clean Water Act. It still would include farmers and farm advocates and consultants. So the consultants that help farmers with their nutrient management plans, et cetera. So all those stakeholders would be involved, but we also wanted to make sure, and the agency feels like they have this ability to make sure that those groups could meet separately if they wanted to, and then also meet together. So they wanted to have a meeting with just farmers or a meeting with just the water quality folks so that people wouldn't feel nervous about speaking freely with everyone in the room. But then they could all come together about the sort of moving forward with the regulations. So we did some changes there. We made some grammatical changes because I'm a grammar fiend. And that was basically the changes we made. It did go to finance. The reason it went to finance is because there are some fees associated with the permits. The fee revenue would now move from Agency of Ag to Agency of Natural Resources, but there would never be a case where farmers would have to pay 2 fees. They would pay 1 fee and it would go to A&R to cover the CAFO work. So that was basically what we did.
Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Under the definition of waters, I didn't hear anything about wetlands, which could be woody swamp or other.
Yeah. Wetlands, I would, there are a whole host of regulations that are related to wetlands. And I would ask Mike O'Grady for how those interact with waters of the state and these regulations, because I don't want to misspeak. I have in my head what I think, but what I think is correct, but I would be reluctant. So I would definitely ask Mike O'Grady, but this bill doesn't change any of wetland regulations that farmers have to comply with or that developers have to comply with. It's specifically to point and non-point runoff. So it wouldn't change what they're required to do if they want to build or harvest it.
I think that suggestion. I do believe last year, Council O'Grady talked about non-point source and point source specifically. We're not wetland.
Correct. That is correct. But there's a sort of, I don't want to misspeak on my understanding of the wetland regulations. So definitely ask Mike O'Grady, but this doesn't change that at all. I spent a good portion of my life attempting to make changes to the wetlands regulations in my first term when I was on agriculture. We tried and didn't ever succeed. So anytime you deal with wetlands, it's complicated. I don't know if you were on the ag committee that year.
I was not.
For you? Yeah, you remember.
In the forestry world, wetlands are
Yeah.
sort of unique or specific soils are receive a lot of protection.
Yes, exactly. And those protections are not changed by this bill.
Representative Nelson and then Representative O'Brien.
Yeah, question for you, Chair. Secretary Moore's coming in
She's scheduled to testify at 11, actually.
and so she would be able to speak to the wetlands issue.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
John.
I'm still trying to get my head around the CAFO, like, will this, maybe there'll be another MOU down the road because say, I assume CAFO might have like animal welfare, since it's about concentrating animals not getting out to pasture, et cetera. Would that necessitate an MOU between, say, ANR and our agency of ag as far as, you know, who makes sure animals in CAFO are being treated right? And so we don't have ANR having to be.
Right. So this is, as I think Senator Colomar said, this is only about water quality regulations. So anything to do with animal welfare or, you know, feed or, you know, all pesticides, all of that stuff would still be under the Agency of Agriculture.
So do we need an MOU then just to have a bright line so that our agency knows what part of a CAFO they regulate and
Right.
the ANR regulates?
There is in the bill, we got rid of the word MOU. The EPA didn't like that. But there is, I think it's called an agreement. So there's something that replaces it so that it's clear who's regulating what. But I think also the agencies understand that the water stuff now will be ANR. Everything else to do with ag will be ag.
Say ag.
Yeah. And the other thing about this, and one of the reasons that we wanted to move forward with this session, and I hope the House will concur, is we wanted to make sure that this was in place for clarity for farmers so they know what's going on, because it's been this area of back and forth for a number of years and a little bit confusing. But also so ANR can sort of get moving with the work that they have to do and actually would start that work this year during this season. They already are starting working with stakeholders. And also because of the sort of chaos and confusion at the federal level, wanting to have clarity in our own state statutes. So everybody knows what's supposed to happen. So those were some of the reasons that this bill took a weird path and a late path, but also there's urgency. So hopefully you all can move things along as well.
Feeling that sense of urgency. So
Yeah.
before we let you go, Senator, I just wanted to ask, yesterday when we were getting the walkthrough from Michael Grady, he mentioned, I think, and I'm checking my notes and my notes are a little ambiguous, but I think he mentioned sections 5 and 6, and others can chime in here if I got it wrong, were language that are not addressing any EPA concerns. But
And 6.
so that's the seasonal application of manure, which gives, and I'm on probably a different version of the bill, so I'm not going to give you a page number, but
Okay.
so section 5, seasonal application of manure, which basically just gives the secretary, it says the secretary, I think it's the ag agency secretary,
Yep.
the emergency authorization to give an exemption.
Yes, and this was language that was added in the ag committee. And I think this is just to make sure that the ag statutes are updated to reflect these changes. My understanding, and Senator Collimore, correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that the seasonal application of manure and it looks like section 6 is about
All farm.
small farms, that they needed clarity about who would oversee the application of manure, because I think it's wrapped up in the water quality statutes in the ag chapters. And so this takes it out and says that the ag agency is still overseeing that. Yeah, not ANR. it sort of teased it out, is my understanding of it. But again, that was in the Ag Committee, not Natural Resources Committee.
Should have.
So yeah, maybe the Secretary of Ag, Julie, Secretary of A&R probably knows too, but I would ask them to clarify if you want more. And the small farm certification is also just, I think, clarifying that they are still required to meet the RAPs. That was, I think, all tied up. Small farms are less likely to be identified as CAFOs. But they would still have to meet the CAFO requirements. They're just less stringent for small farms, I think.
Yes, currently, not all small farms have to annually certify compliant with the RAP. So this changes that to make sure that it's clear they do. So there are small farms now that don't annually certify compliance with RAPs. There's a threshold there. If you have 50 acres or more of annual crops, 50 acres or more of vegetables, or 50 to 199 mature dairy cows, that you're in that sector. And there was some, I guess, confusion or ambiguity. So let's just clarify this.
Because you also have to remember this started as a miscellaneous ag bill. So I think they were trying to clarify a bunch of ag statutes along the way.
Representative O'Brien.
Just quickly, does this change anything as far as the regulations on TMDLs for farmers, depending on where they are? So like Champlain or Memphremagog or the coming one in the Connecticut Valley?
Does not change anything about the TMDLs. It helps, hopefully, to meet the TMDLs by having, more oversight of the water quality. And since A&R is required to meet the TMDL, bringing it under their umbrella.
Right. I don't see any other hands. So thank you, both of you, for your time this morning.
You're welcome. Thank you for taking this up.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Nice to see you. You have a really great room in the corner
Yeah.
here with the light and everything.
This one's got lots for a long.
That's right.
Hey, when it was hot yesterday, we had that door open and we had a cross breeze going through here.
That's nice. Did you open the windows?
Don't tell anybody.
Not only did we open, we
Top
took them
secret
out.
on camera. We opened the window in finance too. Huge window. It was really lovely. Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Take care, guys and gals.
Oh, you're over there.